Welcome, everyone. We'll give everybody a few minutes to sign in and we will get started. We'll go ahead and get started, and then as people join, they'll get to the important piece, the meat and potatoes of the webinar, so to speak. I'm Dawn Bentley, and I am the Director of Youth and Transition Services at the Ability Center. Welcome to part 3 of our Parent and Caregiver series, discussing SSI and SSDI and STABLE accounts. We do have an ASL interpreter on screen along with our moderators and panelists, and we do have closed captioning available as well. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available both on the Ability Center's website and Lucas County Board of Developmental Disabilities website also. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our amazing panelists. We have Nick Hancart, who is the Outreach Manager for Stable Accounts Ohio. He began with the Treasurer's Office in 2017 after 2 summers of internships in the office working with the Public Affairs Department. Nick travels throughout Ohio speaking to professionals, families, and other groups on the impact that stable accounts have for people with disabilities. He's an alumnus of the University of Dayton and currently lives in the Short North in downtown Columbus. So stable accounts for the first time provide tax advantage savings and investment opportunities to individuals with disabilities without the risk of losing their means tested benefits, which is huge, and a reason why today's webinar is so important. Erin Thompson is a native of Toledo, Ohio, and she joined the Social Security Administration in 2001 upon graduation from the University of Toledo. She started her career as a claims representative specializing in retirement, survivors, disability, and health insurance. She was promoted in 2004 to Public Affairs Specialist, and she's the primary contact for media relations, outreach, and presentations for the agency in the greater Toledo area. You can listen to Erin on Social Security and You, a radio show on Proclaim 102.3 FM. She has had guest appearances on the Glass City Grind, Jerry Anderson's Leading Edge, Dan Cummings' Money Sense, and Rebecca Rainier's Full Plate segment on Channel 13. Erin has also had regular columns in many of our area newspapers. She's a member of the Triad Council, which is a board through the Area Office on Aging for senior issues, mainly on crime prevention and awareness concerns. And she's also a member of COPE, which is an organization protecting the elderly, the Reentry Coalition, and the Coalition of Children and Families. She's also on the Domestic Violence Task Force, the CARE Team, Alliance for Concerned Citizens, and the Human Trafficking Coalition, as well as NOGA, which is Northwest Ohio Gerontological Association. Rebecca Steinhauser is here with us also from ABLE. She's a 1996 graduate of the University of Dayton School of Law, so we have 2 Dayton alum. She started her law career as a AmeriCorps attorney at Advocates for Basic Legal Equality, and she specialized in housing issues from 96 through 98. In 1999, she was hired as a full-time staff attorney at Legal Services of Northwest Ohio, specializing in public benefits at Advocates for Basic Legal Equality since July 2013. Over the past 20 years, she has done numerous trainings and presentations in the area of public benefits and elder law. So as you can tell, given their bios, we have a dream team here to talk to you about the topics at hand. So without further ado, Heather, if you'd like to introduce yourself and start with the questions.
Absolutely. I'm Heather McVeigh. I'm an SSA coordinator with the Lucas County Board of Developmental Disabilities, and I'm pleased to be a part of this program today. Erin, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. Can you explain what is SSI and what is SSDI?
That's a great question, and thanks for having me on this today. So SSI and Social Security Disability are both disability programs. However, there's some big differences. So with SSI, it is not only a disability program, it's also a need-based program. So who qualifies for SSI? Someone that's a baby, someone that's up to age 64, and is disabled and also has a financial need. By financial need, that means that they generally qualify for other types of assistance programs. They don't have a lot of other money coming in. They're not married to somebody with a lot of money. And what the government determines as a lot of money may not be exactly what a person determines as a lot of money. Basically, if a person has more than $814 a month in income, they are not going to qualify for SSI. SSI pays on the first of the month. And so that's kind of the basic on SSI. Now, SSDI, Social Security Disability, is also a disability program, but it requires that someone has worked and paid into the Social Security program. So the basic difference is SSI doesn't matter how much someone has worked, just that they meet the disability criteria and their need-based. Social Security Disability, that person has worked or they're a disabled adult child of an individual that's getting retirement, disability, or that has passed away. They were disabled prior to their 22nd birthday and they're unmarried, or they're a surviving widow or widower between 50 and 59 and a half. So there's a lot of confusion between both programs. The Social Security Disability pays on Wednesdays or pays on the 3rd of the month. So not everybody knows what they receive. They generally know when their check comes.
Great information. So is there eligibility that's specific to both of those programs?
Absolutely. So in addition to looking to see if a person meets our medical criteria, which basically they start with their local Social Security office and start the application process. In Ohio, decisions are taking about 90 days right now. So you'd contact your local office, fill out the paperwork. And when I say paperwork, we're completing all of our applications right now, either by phone or online. So a person would complete either a questionnaire by phone or online. We submit the evidence, send it down to Columbus for a medical decision as long as they meet basic criteria. So for SSI, we're going to determine, is the person financially need-based? And then we're going to send the case down. For the Social Security Disability, we're going to see if the person's met our work requirement, they worked long enough, or they qualify under an individual that has worked long enough. And then we're going to send it down for a medical decision. But the medical decision is made for both SSI and Social Security Disability at the same place in Columbus, also known as the Bureau of Disability Determination Services.
Awesome. So why do people have to reapply at certain ages?
Why do people have to reapply? So it really depends. With SSI, we can pay children versus Social Security Disability. It's generally going to be someone that's 18 or over for that program because of the work requirement. With SSI, a person can qualify as a child and meet our child disability criteria. And then at age 18, we have to check and make sure they meet our adult criteria, which is entirely different. For child criteria, we're basically looking at not only the parent's income, we're looking at the child's condition, and are they severe and markedly impaired compared to their peers, okay? So are they on an IEP? Are they significantly delayed? Things like that. For the adult determination, we are looking at not just their condition, we're looking at, and their need if they're SSI, we're looking at, do they meet the work requirement, but we're checking to see if their condition prevents them from doing any kind of work. So that work requirement comes in after the age of 18, and we're not looking at that prior. Now, once individuals are receiving Social Security disability or SSI as an adult, will we do what we call redeterminations or continuing disability reviews? Yes, we will. It really depends on the condition. So we should be doing reviews every 1, 3, 5, or 7 years with everyone that's receiving a benefit from Social Security until they hit about their 60s in age, if they were still receiving money from our program. And it really depends on certain conditions we're not going to review as often. The conditions that I consider are automatics, are blind, are disabled, are deaf. Those individuals, they're not going to be reviewed as often as someone that maybe has diabetes or a heart condition.
Okay. If I get a job, will I lose my benefits?
So that's a great question. And there's a lot of misinformation about working and receiving both SSI and Social Security disability. We always want to encourage people to try out their ability to work, but always make sure that they're reporting their work to us. What I would say the best idea and suggestion to do is if you are on benefits, if you are on SSI or Social Security disability, if you're thinking about getting a job, contact our agency and let us know what you're thinking about doing. How will it affect your specific benefit? Because work does affect SSI much differently than it affects Social Security disability. A common misconception that people say is, oh, you can work as long as it's part-time. With SSI, anything a person earns over $85 a month will reduce what they receive from SSI unless they are a student under the age of 22, still in full-time attendance. And so everybody's situation is a little different. What I encourage is that they reach out to us or organizations like the Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation, or even the Ability Center, and have us take a look at their specific case and see just how will things be affected.
Got it. So you mentioned a myth or a misconception. What are some other common misconceptions about Social Security?
So I've worked for the agency for almost 20 years, and I hear a lot of misconceptions about SSI. One of the biggest misconceptions I hear is that it's easier to get. It's easier to qualify for SSI than it is to qualify for Social Security disability. That is incorrect. The disability determination for medical criteria is made at the same place by the same people for both Social Security disability and SSI. If anything, SSI is a little harder because you also, in addition to that disability, you also have to meet the need-based criteria. And if a person is married, if they're under 18, then their parents' income counts. If they have money in the bank, if they have an extra home, if they have an extra vehicle, if they have too much of anything, then they do not qualify for our services. So when people say it's easier to get SSI, that's a big misconception. Another is that we pay illegals. I hear that all the time. So SSI pays illegals. And Social Security, for Social Security and SSI, for Social Security, you don't have to be a US citizen. You just have to be legally here. For regular retirement, survivors, regular disability, you have to be legally here, have green card status, okay? For SSI, you almost always have to be a citizen. We almost never pay individuals that are legally here. The exception to that would be the refugees. So sometimes refugees will qualify. It is for a very short period of time. And if they do not have their citizenship status after that period of time, which is up to 7 years, then their benefits would stop. But we do not pay illegals, whether it's SSI or Social Security disability. Other individuals will tell me, and we've heard this a lot in the last year, that unemployment does not affect what someone gets from SSI. Everything affects what a person receives from SSI. money in the bank, stocks, bonds, gifts, unemployment, wages, pensions, inheritances. Everything has the ability to affect, with the exception of the stable, which we're going to talk about today. Another thing is I can qualify when I'm in prison. Well, you could, if you are connected in a prison that does a pre-release case, they can do applications for you within 90 days of your release. That is accurate. But as far as getting an actual check while you are in prison, that is incorrect. If you are incarcerated, you are generally not going to qualify for any type of Social Security program, and most definitely you will not qualify for SSI.
Okay. So how much money can I put in a trust fund for my child without disqualifying them from getting SSI?
So that's a great question, Heather. And that's also a question that people don't always get right. There's a few different types of trusts. There's special needs trust, there's irrevocable trust, which tend to be the same as a special needs trust. And then there's revocable trust. If a person's qualifying for SSI, in general, if they have an irrevocable trust, as long as it's set up correctly, then whatever is in that irrevocable trust is not going to reduce or affect that SSI. However, when they get their distributions once a year, whenever they receive them, that will probably affect their SSI usually for 1 month. What I encourage people to do with trust is always interview whoever you're setting that up. Generally, it's going to be an attorney. And I would check with them a few things. How many trusts have they successfully set up with Social Security? How long have they been doing this? And then beyond that, because trusts are very expensive, it's a lot of money to put out. In the event that Social Security does not approve the trust, because not all trusts are approved, we have to take a look at them. We send it to the Office of General Counsel. Office of General Counsel is going to determine, yes, this meets our criteria. No, it does not. In the event that the Office of General Counsel comes back and says, no, this is not going to meet our criteria, is that attorney going to rewrite it? And how much are they going to charge for that? Or is it just included that their $3,000 fee or whatever they charge is going to take care of everything? So those are important things. We cannot recommend any attorneys or not recommend any attorneys. What we can encourage people to do is check with agencies such as the Ability Center and Legal Aid, and check with them and see who they recommend. But we cannot recommend or not recommend anyone specific.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin, for all the great information.
Sure.
And I'm sure you'll be able to jump in periodically with more information as we
Absolutely.
go along. Rebecca, I did have a couple of questions that hopefully you can answer for us. The first one is, why would I get denied for SSI or SSDI, and how do I appeal that?
Okay, so you can get denied for a variety of reasons, and Erin kind of covered income and resources. So SSI has an extremely low income limit. So there are instances where maybe somebody's married and they're going to count the income of your spouse, and it's very easy to get denied in those cases. Social Security's resource limit is $2,000. So that's obviously not a lot of money. The income's a little more complicated. So you can't have any more than $814 in income. They do treat earned income a little bit differently. So earned income, Erin had talked about the fact that they'll count any income over $85, but there's a nice work incentive that they have where if you are working, they're going to count less than half of what you earn. So again, and if there are children, then they're going to count the parents' income. And that's also a little more complicated. So they will look at the parents' income and count that. So you could be denied for the income or the resources. And some people want to know, well, what resources do they count? Well, it's nice that I always think of it in terms of things that you own. So examples would be bank accounts, stocks and bonds, money, cash money, but some resources are exempt. So if you own a home and you're living in it, they're not going to count that against you. If you own a car, they're not going to count that one car as long as you're using it for transportation. They're not going to count things like your household goods and your personal effects, or burial spaces for you or your immediate family, or property that you or your spouse use in a trade or a business. And as we've mentioned, they're not going to count those funds in the stable account, which is a wonderful development. For years. People on SSI just couldn't save anything. So the stable account has been a real blessing for people. So those are a couple reasons why you could get denied, but you can also get denied because you don't meet the disability standards. So Social Security defines disability as the inability to do any substantial gainful activity by reason of a medically determinable physical or mental impairment, which can result in death or which has lasted or will last for no less than 12 months. So to summarize that, and that's the adult standard, I should say, basically they're saying you need to show that you're not able to engage in substantial gainful activity, which basically means work. And you can't engage in that full-time work because you have a severe physical or mental impairment. So when you go to a hearing, most people actually have impairment. It's a rare person that would not have a severe impairment when you're at that hearing level. However, you also have to show that you can't do the work that you did in the past and that you can't do any other work, which can be difficult to show. So it may be easier to show as you get older and you're less able to be trained to get into other types of work. Now they have a completely different standard for children because obviously children don't have the obligation to work if you're under 18. In that case, you have to show that there's a medically determinable physical or a mental impairment or impairments which result in marked and severe functional limitations. So with kids, they look at different categories of functioning. So they look at things like your ability to pay attention and concentrate, your ability to acquire information and use information, your health and your physical well-being. So if they determine that you are either marked in two categories or extreme in one category, they'll determine that the child is disabled. So those are the three main reasons somebody's going to be denied for SSI: the income, the resource, and not meeting those disability standards.
So how would people appeal a denial?
So yeah, I should mention you always have the right to appeal. If you think you were denied in error, you can appeal, and you can appeal things like whether or not you're eligible for SSI, whether or not the amount of your SSI payment is correct, whether or not you're disabled, or whether you have an overpayment. So after you apply for SSI, Aaron had mentioned it's taking about 90 days for a determination to be made. When you get that determination, if you disagree with it, if it's unfavorable, you can request what's called a reconsideration. Social Security has an absolutely wonderful website with lots of resources. So all of their forms are on that website. So the reconsideration, if you go into the search box and you look for the forms, it's form 561. You have to request a reconsideration within 60 days of the date that you get that denial. They usually consider that you received a notice 5 days after it was sent. Should also mention that if it's a continuing benefits case, so sometimes people are already receiving benefits and they'll receive a notice that they're being proposed for termination because Social Security believes their condition has improved. If you want to continue receiving benefits while you appeal, there's a different appeal window there. You have to appeal within 10 days. So it's very important. A lot of people miss that appeal time, and then they're waiting without benefits until they get to that hearing stage. So that's the first level of appeal. If you get denied at the reconsideration, you can then make your appeal. Again, it's a 60-day appeal window to what's called the administrative law judge. And this is generally where ABLE would step in. We can sometimes help with cases at the lower levels. If you have questions, I would always go ahead and apply with us. We have some grants that will allow us to step in earlier for some particular people. But generally, we're going to be representing you at that administrative law judge stage. So that's where you actually go in front of a judge. Most of the cases, if we're going to have success, are at that level. And those cases are actually moving a little bit faster than they normally used to be. So when we get in front of the judge, we're getting decisions usually within 2 months. Now that may sound like a long time to you, but compared to what it was like even 2 years ago, sometimes we'd be waiting a year to get a decision from that judge. So if you get an unfavorable decision at that level, then you can appeal to what's called the Appeals Council. That's a body in Virginia that looks at your case. That again has to be filed within 60 days. You can sometimes get the Appeals Council to look at additional evidence, but it has to be new material and related to the period on or before that hearing decision. So you can't necessarily submit brand new evidence. And there is a balancing act. Sometimes it may make more sense if it looks like you've got some new conditions to just apply again for Social Security benefits. We've had people in that situation where we apply again and we immediately get the benefits because maybe by that time they meet what's called a listing. The Social Security listings are a group of rules regarding different conditions. So there's listings for mental impairments, there's listings for musculoskeletal disorders, for heart disorders. And if you meet the criteria for one of those listings, you're automatically going to get on benefits, providing you meet all of the income and resource limitations if it's an SSI case. So the Appeals Council is going to normally do 3 things. They're either going to deny your request. Honestly, they deny or uphold the decision of the ALJ on most of the cases. But they could also do what's called remanding it. And when they remand it, they say, we think the judge missed something. We're sending it back for another hearing. It could come back for another hearing in front of that same judge, or you could get a different judge. So the Appeals Council does not move quickly. Sometimes I would say the fastest you're going to get a decision is probably 4 months. We've seen them take up to 2 years, although they also seem to be getting a little quicker now. So the very last stage, if you get denied at the Appeals Council, is you can file a case to federal court. Here in Toledo, that would be the Northern District Federal Court. We take some of these cases, but honestly, it has to be a really good case because we have to show a serious mistake in the law was made before you file to federal court. So those are the basic levels of appeal. So if you have any questions about appeals, or if you feel like you need assistance with an SSI case, that's one of the major things that we do at ABLE and at Legal Aid of Western Ohio. So I will drop my contact information in the chat box in case people have questions or need assistance.
Thank you, Rebecca. The last question that we had for you this morning, as of right now anyway, is if I get an overpayment, how do I handle that?
Yeah, so overpayments are one of those not fun things that can happen at Social Security. So an overpayment is basically when you receive benefits to which you're not entitled, and they can happen for various reasons. So some common reasons for overpayments are work activity. Erin had mentioned people working and receiving benefits. There is so much misinformation out there. It's not even funny. And people think they know the rules and they don't. And then they go work. And SSI payments, overpayments are extremely common. So I should mention that at ABLE, I've been a certified benefit planner for 19 years. So I am happy to assist people with benefit planning and explaining not only how your Social Security benefits will be impacted, but most people on SSI not only have SSI, but they also have food assistance. They may have Medicaid. They may have subsidized housing. We can explain how all of those different things are going to be impacted. We can even, I'll usually do a chart for people with different earning levels and show them how their benefit will change, how their food assistance amount will change. So definitely, if you're thinking about working, recommend doing benefit planning before you do that. So another reason you could have an overpayment is having resources over the allowable limit. Another thing we see a lot, and this is mainly with the older population, is government pension offsets. So someone's getting public employee retirement and they have to adjust that with Social Security and it lowers your benefit. Sometimes the benefit doesn't get lowered and then there's an overpayment. Unfortunately, the overpayments are not usually caught when they first occur. So it's really important to remember if you're working, report that work. And if you have a government pension, report that pension, report any increase in the pension. If you get resources, so sometimes people may be saving money in the bank, people may get an inheritance, people may even win some lottery money. All of that needs to be reported to Social Security because if you don't report, you're going to incur an overpayment. And we can talk to you about how to spend down those resources if you're on SSI. So there are cases where you may report your income and resources and still get notice of an overpayment. So for this reason, it's very important to document the fact that you made the report. So for SSI, telephone reporting system for earnings, and you can get a confirmation number to show that you made the report. You can also, I've seen Social Security give people prepaid envelopes that they can send in with their check stubs every month just to make sure you're making those regular reports. And so I would report it. I would say if you're sending something in, keep a copy of that. I would say send it by certified mail so you can prove that you sent it. Because if you can't prove you made the report, they may charge you with the overpayment. And if you do get an overpayment, you certainly have, again, appeal rights, and you can request what's called a waiver. And you can get that form online as well. That's form 632. A waiver is when Social Security tells you you don't have to repay the money. In order to get a waiver, you have to show two things. So you have to show the overpayment's not your fault. So if you were working and you didn't report it, you're not going to get a waiver because that's going to be determined to be your fault. So also, in addition to showing it's not your fault, you have to show you can't afford to repay the overpayment. If you get SSI, Social Security assumes you can't afford to repay it. However, if you get another benefit like SSDI, they don't necessarily assume that. They're going to look at your income and your assets. So there are cases where the overpayment might not be your fault, but you might still have to repay it if you have the ability to repay. So you could have money in the bank if you're on SSDI or retirement. You could have enough money and not a lot of expenses where they determine that you can afford to repay. So to show that you can't afford to repay, you're going to complete that waiver form, and you have to list your expenses, and you also have to document the expenses. So at least most of them. So Social Security doesn't typically ask you to document things like food expenses unless they look really unreasonable. If you have an expense that doesn't vary every month, like rent or a mortgage, you can usually just use one proof of payment, like a withholding from a bank account or a rent receipt. If you have an expense that varies from month to month, and that would be something like maybe your gas or your electric bill, Social Security is usually going to want to see 2 or 3 copies, in my experience, of bills, and they're going to average those out. If you have a monthly credit card bill, they're going to typically only count the minimum monthly payment, even if you're making a higher payment. And they're also going to look at things like resources. So even if your monthly income and expenses balance out and it looks like you don't have much left over at the end of the month, if you have money in the bank or other assets, they're going to determine that you have the ability to repay. So on an SSI payment, they'll typically only withhold 10% of the federal benefit rate, which is about $80 in this year. For a disability overpayment, they're going to look at your income and expenses to determine how much you might be able to afford to repay. They usually like to get an overpayment back in 3 years. Obviously, that's not always going to be possible depending upon the amount of the overpayment. My all-time record in overpayments is I had a gentleman who had a $100,000 overpayment, and that one had gone unnoticed for 17 years. And that gentleman was actually, he was a DAC recipient, and he got married, which you can't get married unless you marry another Social Security beneficiary, or you're going to lose those benefits. They didn't notice for 17 years that he was married. So that overpayment went that long. For that gentleman, I was able to get a special exception because he got assistance with paying his Part D premium. So we were able to get a $10 a month repayment plan for that gentleman. That's not going to be the case for everybody. So everybody's situation is different. You can work with the Social Security office. You can suggest a certain payment plan. They may not always agree with that payment plan, and they may start withholding an amount that they would like to withhold. You do always have the ability to appeal that to an administrative law judge. I've sometimes had them withhold. I had a lady where they were withholding $300. We knew she was at fault, but we appealed to the ALJ, asked him for a different withholding, and he ordered that $25 be withheld. So it's always, I think it's always makes sense to appeal on an issue like that if you think the withholding amount is going to be unaffordable for you. There are a couple of other narrow instances where you can get a waiver if you can show that recovery of an overpayment would be against equity and good conscience. One of those situations is where you change your position in reliance of having the Social Security money, and you'll be harmed by the recovery. So this could involve making a major purchase that you wouldn't not otherwise have made if you didn't have the benefits. So I had a client recently, and we went to an ALJ hearing on this. She was receiving Social Security retirement, and she was also getting a school retirement pension. The overpayment wasn't her fault. She had reported the pension, but she did have a fairly decent income where she could have probably afford to repay it. That's what they determined. But right before she got that overpayment, she and her husband had purchased a motorhome and the payments were $500 monthly. The reason they purchased that is because she had that $500 in Social Security benefits. They wouldn't have purchased that if they thought the money would not be available. So we made a waiver request based on that narrow exception. Another situation where Social Security could waive an overpayment is where an individual forfeits a valuable right in reliance on Social Security benefits. So an example of that would be you refuse a job offer because you think you have Social Security benefits you can rely on. If you get an overpayment, ABLE may be able to assist you. The paperwork alone is very overwhelming. I think people look at it. It's fairly simple, I think, if you're on SSI because you don't have to complete a lot of the paperwork. But if you're not on SSI, I think people get very overwhelmed and confused with it. And we can assist you with completing it, gathering everything you need and submitting that to Social Security. Social Security will schedule a conference where you can present your case. We've been doing, you can do those by telephone now, and we've even done some of those by telephone even before COVID. The Social Security office in Toledo is very helpful. I wish that I had an Erin in every Social Security office, but we don't. It's really the claims reps are generally pretty helpful. So if you have questions, even before you get to us, I found that they're pretty helpful with answering those questions and getting you what you need. And so you'll have that overpayment conference and you can submit any evidence you think is relevant at that conference. If you get an unfavorable determination there, again, you have appeal rights. And like I said, you can ultimately appeal that decision to an administrative law judge. And they tend to be a little bit more liberal about granting waivers and affordable repayment plans. So don't be intimidated about continuing to follow through with that appeal process. And remember, we're out here to help if you need that.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm going to just go through, I know Erin has been amazing at managing the Q&A, and I'm just going to read them so that way none of the information is missed by anyone who's tuning in. So one of our audience members asked, our disabled daughter lives with us and we charge her rent. Why does her check amount get reduced because she's living with us? And Erin responded, for SSI, if a person is not paying their fair share, then the SSI can be discounted up to 1/3 of the federal benefit rate. Some people will never be able to pay their fair share due to the household bills. For example, the mortgage is $2,000 a month and 2 people live in the house. A person on SSI cannot ever pay $1,000 a month as they don't receive that much money. That person would never receive full SSI as they cannot pay their half of the bills. Another audience member asked, how does a patient resume their Social Security payments if they return home from being in a nursing home for long-term care? Their Social Security check was being used to help pay for their room and board of the nursing facility. And Erin responded, the person or the payee contacts us and lets us know they are no longer there. They can call the local office at 866-331-2196 from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday, and they can update that information. Or if they need to secure a new payee that is not the facility, they will need a trustworthy person or an agency to apply to be the person's payee. We also had a question, can a child on SSI go to SSDI when a parent retires? The answer to that is yes. If a person was found disabled prior to their 22nd birthday and they are unmarried, they will generally qualify off of a parent's retirement when they file. So when I retire in the future, the child will switch to SSDI. If the child was found disabled prior to age 22, yes, and then they will also qualify for Medicare. There are no resource limits with SSDI like there is with SSI. So hopefully that answers some of the questions. Erin also shared in the chat that you can go to www.ssa.gov/my account for people that are over age 18 to see what they're eligible for. You can open your account and check it yearly, even when you are not receiving benefits. So with that, I am going to move on to questions regarding our STABLE accounts. So we have with us again, Nick Hankart. Nick, can you explain a little bit, what is a STABLE account?
Of course. Well, I know that Rebecca and I have a very similar acronym, so I apologize for anybody that might get confused. That's one thing about our world here, is that you can't have enough acronyms. But we come from federal legislation back in 2014 called the ABLE Act, and that stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience Act. And that's the whole goal. But when the federal law was written, the original intention was for every state to have their own plan. So we'd have 50 different plans, and Ohioans would use Ohio's, Florida's, you get the picture. But what happened was that we still, after almost 7 years now of that passing, have only 43 states that have ABLE plans across the country. So there are still states that their citizens aren't able to take advantage of these plans. So that's where states like Ohio and plenty of others across the country stepped up in regards to allowing for other people across the country to join. So for example, here in Ohio, that you don't have to live here to take advantage of this program. And that's the STABLE account program. So that stands for State Treasury, Achieving a Better Life Experience. And that's simply because the state treasurer's office administers that program. And we have over 20,000 people that are taking advantage of the program right now all across the country. But we know that as people continue to enroll, education is the biggest thing for us. So when people say, why do I need a STABLE account? What is a STABLE account? The simple answer is that it's a savings and investment account that is an asset shield, because it allows for people to continue to maintain eligibility or continue to retain benefits and still continue to save above that resource limit. So depending upon the benefits that somebody may be receiving, the resource limit may be different, but when it comes to putting the money into a STABLE account, it doesn't necessarily matter what that resource limit is, that people are still able to save above it.
Thank you, Nick. So what does a parent or a caregiver, a guardian, what do they need in order to open a STABLE account for their child?
It's a great question. And in regards to eligibility, we have, first off, when people are asking about physical documents that they may need to provide, at the onset, there is nothing that people need to provide. There may be an identity verification process that comes through our securities and frauds team to make sure that people are correctly opening up the accounts and that action doesn't need to be taken down the road. So we try to hedge some of those off, and we may ask people for proof of address or a social security card or even a birth or a copy of a birth certificate. But when people enroll to start off, there's no physical documentation that people have to upload or mail to our offices. And in terms of eligibility, we have 3 rules. The first one is that you cannot already have another STABLE account. So there's a limit of 1 per person. That's different than checking accounts or 529 college savings plans, where you're able to have many of those. But in terms of STABLE, you're only able to have 1 of them. So it's an easy first eligibility requirement. The second is that the disability for the account holder must have onset, have been showing symptoms, or occurred prior to the age of 26. Now, for those people that are receiving county board services, theirs is 22, so many of those people are automatically qualifying. But what I always like to let people know is that you do not have to be under 26 to enroll. Because, as I mentioned, the ABLE Act itself has only been around since 2014, yet we already have people in their 80s and 90s that have STABLE accounts. And so all they needed to do was just to be able to state that, yes, their disability had occurred or onset prior to the age of 26 as well. So don't feel like that's just because you're older than 26 doesn't mean that you're no longer eligible as well. Now, our third rule for eligibility and our final rule for eligibility is we're going to ask people to meet one of these next three things that I mentioned. And it's awesome that Rebecca mentioned some of these earlier, because at the federal level, we piggybacked off of a lot of these eligibility requirements. So the first is that somebody needs for something called self-certification. That's where somebody has a marked and functional limitation that they can show as well. Another is that if somebody is already receiving SSI or SSDI, or they're eligible to receive, but they may not be receiving it this time, that if they're eligible to receive SSI and SSDI, then they automatically qualify as well. And then the third portion to this third rule is something called the list of compassionate allowances, which Aaron knows a lot more about than I do, but that's a list from the Social Security Administration, and we use it so that more people can enroll and take advantage of having a stable account. So those are the eligibility requirements, but physically there's nothing necessarily that a parent or a guardian would need to provide when enrolling, because everything takes place online on our website. You do not need to make an appointment. And if you want to save the enrollment process and come back later, you're also able to do so.
Thank you so much. So do stable accounts act like any other checking account, or what are the differences?
Yes. So since, when I talk about us being around since 2014, in the world of finance, that's not a long time at all. So allowing us to be able to take some of the really advantageous parts of other already existing financial options for people has been really beneficial for us. So we are similar to a checking account in the sense that people are able to use it every day. That's something similar that we share. We're similar to a 529 college savings plan because people are able to save for long-term goals or long-term expenses using this account. And it can be used for education, but also so many more things than education as well. And then we are similar to an investment account because a stable account, as I mentioned earlier, is a savings and investment account. The investment side is totally optional for account holders, but if they want to take advantage of it, then they're more than welcome to as well. And then finally, we are similar to a special needs trust because a special needs trust and a stable account share very similar goals in that we want to be able to help protect people's funds and assets.
That's really helpful. I know one of the questions that we field a lot in our youth department that is really stressful for people with disabilities when they're looking at living independently, which is our ultimate goal, right, is making sure that they have enough between their benefits and work to pay their bills in a timely fashion. So one of the questions is, if someone has a stable account, will that assist them with having their bills be paid in a timely fashion? How does that impact that potential?
It can. And so that's where we would go to, how do we get money out of the stable account? So, utilizing a checking or savings account to get money in, that is the easiest way in order to deposit funds. But if somebody wants to withdraw funds, they can also take funds out of their stable account and put it back into a checking account. But I always, I ask people to heed some things to consider here is that when you take funds out of a stable account, for whatever reason it may be, and you put it back into a checking or savings account, it's once again accountable resource for your benefits. So keeping in mind when people are putting that in, how much they might be putting in, that could be a detriment. So that's why we provide other resources such as a third-party check and using the stable debit card that will pay money or withdraw funds directly out of the stable account. So you don't have to worry about the middleman using the checking account to then pay for those bills. The third-party check, and I'll just use the example of rent here, is where somebody will go online, they'll log into their account, and they will virtually fill out a check. So in this case of rent, they'd be virtually filling out a check to their landlord, the amount of money that they need to send to that person or where it needs to go, the date, anything like that. And that information gets submitted and it comes to us, and we're the ones that physically write the check and mail it. So that's good for a couple reasons. Is that some places still only take checks, but also because it eliminates the middleman of ordering new checks, messing with the post office, stamps, envelopes, that people don't have to worry about that. That's on us. And so that's one way that people can pay bills. But as long as people are mindful of when that gets submitted, because it is just going into the postal service. So maybe it'll take a week to get there. Maybe it may take 2 weeks. I know that the postal service is extremely busy right now. And then the final way that people can spend funds out of their STABLE account would be the STABLE debit card. And this is a loadable Visa card that people can apply for. It's also optional, but people can receive it as well. And I stress loadable here because once you've activated the card, it still doesn't have any funds on it. Let's say somebody has $500 in their STABLE account. They can take a portion of that and load it onto the card. So maybe they have $500 in their account, but they only put $20 on the card. Well, now that the card is loaded with $20, that's all it's going to spend. It will not spend anything else. It will not pull from the account. So if somebody tries to spend something that's worth $25, well, they'd still have $5 left to pay as well. It comes with all the same securities and fraud protections that a Visa card does. And the only other thing along with that is that there is no cash access. So if somebody wants cash access from a STABLE account, they need to work with their checking or savings account, because the reason why we do not allow for any cash access is because we want to be able to provide a check and roster list of every withdrawal and every deposit that's associated with the account. So maybe somebody went to the grocery store, or maybe somebody had to go to Home Depot because their fridge broke in the middle of the night, anything like that. And we want to be able to accurately document that as well. So in terms of record keeping, we try to go above and beyond. We also allow for people to take a picture of their receipt. So if somebody goes to the grocery store, they can take a picture of their receipt and upload it to their account, and it'll be associated with that line item as well. So in terms of record keeping, we try to have every penny accounted for, and so that's why there's no cash access allowed.
I appreciate that. So another thing that's always on the mind of a lot of the families that we work with is future planning. It's something that, a lot of times parents of children with disabilities think of way sooner than many of us. So one of the questions is sort of twofold. What happens to the money accrued in the event that my child passes away prematurely? And on the flip side, is that account protected in the event that a parent passes away and then the child is going to have to acquire a new guardian?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to answer that backwards. But in terms of if the parent passes away and they were the authorized legal representative on the account, so if somebody, and I may have to take a step back here as well, that for those people that are not able to be in charge of their own STABLE account, because if somebody wants to be in charge of their own STABLE account and they're able to, then they can, but sometimes they're not able to. So that's where an authorized legal representative will step in and then be in charge of the account. And typically an authorized legal representative is going to be a parent, a guardian, or a power of attorney. So one of those three types of people. Now, in the event that a parent was the authorized legal representative and they pass away, well, the account we're going to work with immediately as soon as they notify us. That's the biggest thing, that as long as somebody notifies us, it can be our team, it can be our customer service team, we're able to help take action immediately. So whether it's making sure that we onboard the new authorized legal representative, or keeping the account safe until a new one is appointed by the courts. So depending upon what situation, sometimes if a parent passes away, the will stipulate who that is. That's, again, a whole nother process, but that's what will happen if a parent passes away. Now, if an account holder passes away, then what we're going to ask for is that whoever is that estate administrator, and that estate administrator reach out to us again. And so we can allow for that person to have temporary spending access to the account. And so for that temporary spending access, we could be spending for things like funeral expenses or burial expenses. And so all of those things that that person needs after their time of death. Now, well, the question I get more so than any is Medicaid. Nick, what's going to happen with Medicaid? Or for those that may not hear that this is something that we talk about in all of our presentations, but when an individual passes away, Medicaid can ask for funds back that they've given to a person over their lifetime. So that's the Medicaid payback, and there are plenty of other nicknames for it as well. But people want to know if a stable account is able to be garnered by Medicaid. And the short answer is, well, yes and no, because we provided securities and protections along with the stable account, but it's not able to be, completely without Medicaid payback. So when we think of things that Medicaid cannot ask any funds for, the first thing that I think of is a third-party discretionary trust, to where Medicaid isn't able to ask for any funds from this type of account. But a stable account has protections, but you can still ask for funds. So a couple of examples of the protections that we have is that Medicaid will reach out and ask for X amount of money, but it needs to be the amount of money that they gave to an account holder while they had their stable account open. So there needs to be some type of overlap. That's rule number one, is that let's say somebody was receiving Medicaid services for 10 years and they just opened up their stable account today. Well, Medicaid will not be able to ask from those previous 10 years. They will be able to ask anything during that overlap period where they had a stable account and they were receiving Medicaid benefits at the same time. Now, along with that, once we found that overlapped amount, that's when we're going to start chipping away at it. So if somebody is a part of the Medicaid buy-in program, that we're going to add in all of those buy-ins that they've paid month over month, subtract that from that total of the overlapped amount as well. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, we're paying for funeral expenses, we're paying for burial expenses, that anything along with that. And then finally, any bills that somebody may still have. So medical bills, legal bills, maybe even somebody has utilities payment or a rent payment. All these things can be paid before Medicaid can ask for any funds. But once all those protections have been utilized, then Medicaid is able to ask for any remaining funds that are a part of the account.
I appreciate that. And that actually sort of leads into the next question, which is, will having a stable account affect my ability to get SSI or additional assistance, for example, from ODJFS?
Yeah, and that's the whole reason why we're here is, so the example is no, that a stable account won't affect that because that's what the federal law is written to do. So the amount of money that is in a stable account, now for SSI, there is a caveat here that that is up to $100,000. So we can protect up to $100,000 of what somebody has. And then at that point in time, they can look to other community resources. Maybe that would be a special needs trust or other options that are around them in their community that can help protect them. But for SSI, we could protect the first $100,000, which is a decent amount of money. But when in terms of Medicaid, there is no cap like that. And they can go to our lifetime balance limit, which is $502,000 that we can have in the account total over the lifetime of the account holder as well. So that's exactly why a stable account is here, is that we're able to protect funds. We're able to make sure that people can save and still receive benefits, because these benefits, whether it's SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, food stamps, housing, urban development, you name it, these are incredible programs. And the people that work on them are amazing as well. And so being able to keep receiving these programs is paramount. And we know that that's exactly what people want. So allowing for people to be able to do both is pretty amazing.
Perfect. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A, Nick, that I'm going to ask you.
Of course.
The first one is, what if a person lives in Missouri or another state and has a stable account? Can they transfer it to Ohio? Is there a process, and are the stable accounts a national thing?
Yes, so stable accounts are national, and actually Missouri, it's very funny that you bring Missouri up, because since Ohio was the first state to have an ABLE plan, so stable accounts were the first in the nation, that a lot of other states that may not have had the funding from their own specific state legislature, or they wanted a blueprint about how to run a state program, that they reached out to us. And so we are actually administrators of 11 other states' programs along with Ohio's. And so Missouri is one of those. So if you have a Missouri plan, you do already have a stable account in, on the back end as well. But we are national, so people from all different states can utilize a stable account. But what I tell people when we're, which I very much miss, is being out of state and meeting people and actually seeing people face to face, is that if there's another state program that fits better for that family's needs, and there are other websites where you can compare these programs plan by plan. So for example, if there's somebody in Ohio and they've noticed that the California plan, for whatever reasons, may really benefit their family's needs, you're able to do so. So my whole goal here is education, letting people know what's available to them. So as long as people have that knowledge, I'm incredibly happy. But if you want to roll over from state to state for whatever reason, you're able to. And there's free rollovers to any state that you might want. And all you would have to do is just reach out to that specific state administrator. So for example, if somebody wants, if somebody has a Florida plan and they now want a stable account, all they'll do is they'll reach out to that Florida plan and say, hey, I would like the forms for a rollover. And then that customer service team will get the ball rolling, or they can reach out to our customer service team and we'll make the first outreach as well. So again, there are plenty of ways, but if you want to roll over for whatever reason, then you're able to do so.
Wonderful. The next question is, do they have to be declared by SSA, Social Security Administration, to be considered before the age of 26?
Having that is definitely helpful, but it's not mandatory. And that's where that self-certification comes in that I mentioned earlier, because that's a part of the third rule for eligibility. So the first two is that you don't have an account yet and that the disability occurred or onset prior to the age of 26. But a part of that third rule is self-certification. So self-certification allows for people that may not be receiving benefits at this time, or know they will in the future, or plan to in the future, that allows for them to still be able to take advantage of having a stable account without having gone through the eligibility process for other benefits as well. So self-certification would definitely be the way to go in that regard. And for the self-certification method, that all we ask is that people keep doctors' information on hand that have their diagnosis as well.
That's good information. So one of the other questions, I appreciate you fielding these towards the end. So one of the audience members on Facebook said, you cannot use it to get money order for rent. I learned this is a frustrating thing when I try to get a money order for a security deposit for rent. What do you suggest in that case?
So in terms of a money order, I've actually not heard of anybody trying to use their stable account money to get a money order. It's a great question. So if somebody wants to, they can, if they have a checking account, again, that's depending upon the time of the month, that can be risky, but putting the money into a checking account in order to get the money order. But my initial reaction would be, to ask if they're able to take that check or take the debit card, because those are our two methods of payment. But of course, if either of those don't work, I'll put my information in the chat later, and you're always able to reach out to me, and I can work and help, try and solve any problems that we've got. because I haven't heard that problem yet, but we definitely want to help out.
Thank you. So someone else said Pennsylvania doesn't have payback on their account. So if someone in Ohio opens an ABLE account, how does that work? I'm guessing, oh, go ahead.
That would be dependent upon the state of residence. So the state of Ohio Medicaid office is going to still send a letter out to that account. It's then dependent upon that. So for Pennsylvania, for example, it's dependent upon their state legislature and how they wrote their own state ABLE Act and that amendment to eliminate the Medicaid payback, to whether that includes out-of-state residents or not, because there are about 4 states across the country that have eliminated Medicaid payback from their account. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Medicaid can't try and get the funds in other ways. So if Pennsylvania has eliminated it for out-of-state residents as well, that's a different ballgame. Most of them haven't. So if you're a Pennsylvania resident and you have a stable account, then that's still where, or sorry, if you're an Ohio resident and you have a Pennsylvania account, I should say, that's where the Ohio Medicaid office is still going to apply and ask for funds back from the account.
Our last question is, I know we asked Erin the same thing. What are the most common misconceptions or myths surrounding stable accounts that you would want to clear up if you had the opportunity to?
We've covered a lot of them, to be honest with you, which is amazing. Some others is that we're not in competition. This was a huge one, especially when we started traveling across the state and across the country back in 2016 and 2017. Was that we got a lot of pushback from people saying that we might be in competition or trying to whether that's from Special Needs Trust or any other financial accounts, that we're not in competition. What I consider a stable account to be is a tool in the toolbox, just like a trust might be a tool in the toolbox, a checking account that, the more tools you have, the more things you can build with it. And so having just a stable account or having just a checking account, we have people that come up to me and ask, well, I just opened up a stable account. Should I close my checking account? First, I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm not going to say yes or no, but the great thing about it is that you don't have to. So utilizing a checking account, a trust, a stable account, all in conjunction with one another only allows for more opportunities. We have so many people that, whether it's a parent that they have their life insurance that they have planned to go into a trust upon their passing, well, then you can have in that trust that, certain specific times of the month or times of the year that you can have partial funds taken out of that trust and put into the stable account. And so the whole trust and stable account, they work so well together, but there are a lot of abilities to where people can increase what they have the ability to do. So I'd say that's number one, is just that we're not in competition with anybody. We're only here to, again, help bring education and awareness. And that'd probably be my main one. Also, I might just kind of take this time to say that if somebody is employed, they have the opportunity to put more money in their stable account per year. So right now we work off of 2020 numbers, so the previous numbers. Everybody that has a stable account has $15,000 that they can put into the account. And that's a contribution limit. So that can be from places like a trust, or it can be places like grandma and grandpa. But if somebody wants to deposit their own wages, whether indirectly from their checking account or directly straight from their employer, they're able to do so. And that's up to $12,760 per year. But again, I want to let people know that for those that are receiving SSI, just because you're direct depositing the funds into a stable account, Social Security still knows how much you make, and their rules about wages and wage limits still very much apply. So keeping that in mind, that this is a place to be able to make sure that you can save those funds, but it doesn't mean that you can now work full-time 40 hours a week.
I really appreciate it. So I just wanted to mention once again for everybody who is tuning in, or for those, I know a couple mentioned that they had to go and are looking forward to the recording. Erin, Rebecca, and Nick are all sharing their contact information in the chat. So if you should have any questions in the future, you're more than welcome to reach out to the Ability Center or to the Lucas County Board, but you're also welcome to contact any of our panelists as well. We have one last question, which was, my daughter received SSI before she was diagnosed with autism, and we used to live in Atlanta. We moved here once she was diagnosed for better services. When we got here, they stopped SSI and they say she owes $10,000. How will this affect her receiving SSI once she is of age? And Erin responded, if she is not eligible due to the parent's income, she can reapply once she turns age 18. Having an overpayment doesn't mean that a person will not qualify in most circumstances. So once again, I just want to really thank all of you for being here. Erin, Rebecca, and Nick, your time is so valuable, and you have answered, I know, a lot of questions that we often receive from families and that we ourselves have as well. So thank you once again for being here. For those of you who are watching or who click on the recording, we will have this available both on the Ability Center's website as well as Lucas County Boards. So thank you once again, and everybody enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.